On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, the 20-game mark is a bit of an unofficial checkpoint in the NBA season where we kind of know what teams are all about. So, with the Raptors set to play game number 20 on Friday, what do we know so far?
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, December the 1st, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the website that's busted at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, where I have been bad about posting clips this past week, but we'll get back to it, I promise. Also, you can find us on Discord. The link is in the description of the podcast. Come hang out. It's a great little listener community we got building around the show, and it's free to join. It's a great place to be on game nights and in between game nights, as well as the fake trade talk, ceaseless over there in the Discord, among other things. It's not just fake trade talk. There's sports and collectibles. There's video games. There's movies. There's all sorts of stuff. Come hang out with the listeners of the podcast who are sickos just like you over on the Discord. You can find the show for free, of course, and subscribe, follow, rate, review, etc. on all your favorite podcast apps of choice. You can also find us on YouTube. All you got to do is hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell, and you're going to get an update every single time the show is set to premiere, so you never miss it. You don't want to be missing it. Come on, do it. It's very easy to do to support the show. Makes me feel good. Helps the algorithms appreciate in advance for you going to do that and hit the subscribe button over on the tube. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase, and we are off and running here as the Toronto Raptors are set to play game number 20 on their schedule tonight. And we've got some stuff to dive into around that magical number of 20 games. That is sort of the unofficial, all right, we know what this team is about sort of checkpoint that I feel like is sort of colloquially thrown around in NBA circles. And look, it's not always true. Teams improve. Teams have the capacity to get better. I think this Raptors team in particular, because they have a new coach, they're kind of working in some new systems. They've slowly progressed on the offensive end. I still think there is something to tap into more than what we've seen for this team and many other teams through the first 20 games. Other teams will also fall back and not be as good as they've been through the first 20 games in some cases. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it is a pretty decent sample size. We have a pretty good idea of a lot of things about this Raptors team. So we're going to try to dive into some conclusions from the first 20 games. We'll talk in particular as well about the Scottie Pascal OG trio, the numbers they've been putting out, and the sort of outlook for those three as the decision time continues to draw nearer. We're going to take some listener questions as well, sort of tied in with this topic too, to close things out. But first, let's start off with just sort of a tale of the tape of where the Raptors are so far through their first 19 games, with game number 20 against the Knicks coming tonight. Overall, per Clean the Glass, I use Clean the Glass because they isolate for garbage time, which is, I think, a more informative and useful tool than NBA.com. NBA.com has the Raptors at 22nd in offense, 11th in defense. It's not too far off on Clean the Glass. They have 24th in offense for the Raptors, 9th in defense. And look, offense, we know the story. This is a rough half-court team, 25th in half-court offense so far. And this is, I think, a lot of people expected this coming into the year, right? You have a starting five that features a point guard in Dennis Schroeder, who, while he's been very good so far this year, well beyond expectations, still has skill set limitations that keep that offense from flowing beautifully with him at the helm. He has basically just taken all of Fred VanVleet's touches. Scottie Barnes has had some of those dispersed to him. Pascal's touches have gone to Scottie a bit as well, too, over the course of these games. But a lot of Dennis Schroeder has just been kind of stepping into the Fred VanVleet role and occupying it and doing it differently, doing it capably, but not doing it in a way that, expands the offensive horizons for this team, right? He's not a pull-up three-point shooter. And that is sort of the beginning of all the spacing issues that this lineup tends to deal with. A lineup that's been kind of straddling the line of positive and negative over the last little while here. And it's not surprising. Defense, I think it makes sense that it's really, really good. I also think it makes sense that the offense, with the lack of shooting, with Pascal Siakam's dip from three, kind of being pretty untimely and weird and kind of an outlier in his career, complicated by Dennis Schroeder not having that pull-up game. It's a tricky thing to work. There's just not a ton of space to work with. We've seen the lineups that have more shooting and space available be more productive on the offensive end, but overall, not surprising that this is not a very good half-court team. Of course, they're buoying their numbers by being awesome in transition. We know this. They're third in points added per 100 possessions via transition per cleaning the glass, fifth in total points per play, third in frequency. They are living in transition and doing it very well, even with a couple of games of late. The Magic game stands out. The Nets game stands out, where they just were not very good in transition. I think the Cavs game as well, they had a pretty rough go in transition. Actually, I think they were fine against the Nets. I'm mixing those two games up. Either way, there have been a couple of setbacks lately, but for the most part, this is one of the best transition teams in basketball, and they lean into it because they know that's exactly how they're going to get a bunch of their looks. On the defensive side, look, it hasn't been quite as airtight as I had hoped it would be. We've seen them kind of come unspooled in some certain spots, had really bad games mixed in with some really, really good games, I should say. Like, they're ninth for a reason. They are capable of some pretty impressive things. I think their work against the Suns was one of their best defensive performances of the season. You could throw in a few other ones. Frankly, I thought that Pacers one, where yes, they gave up 132 points in a game they barely scraped out by 1 point. I thought their defense against what has been the best offense in the history of basketball so far this year was really interesting and really good and really, I think, emblematic of why it can be a sort of calling card for these Raptors. There's a couple things I'm kind of keeping an eye on. In particular, one number that kind of pops out when you kind of go through the defensive metrics. They're kind of middle of the road when it comes to like shot diet they're allowing. I think they're 12th in locational expected field goal percentage, which is essentially, what would you expect the other team to shoot based on the quality of looks that they're giving up? Like, they're not bad in that department. They're not elite in that department. But there's one area of the floor where they're kind of getting burned, and it's at the rim. They're not allowing like an insane amount of volume at the rim. They're like middle of the pack, as they are in most of these categories, but they're 27th in shooting percentage allowed at the rim, like north of 68%. That one doesn't quite like pass the smell test to me, because I feel like Jakob Poeltl's done a pretty damn good job as like a backline rim protector, and Scottie Barnes' whole defensive leap has been tied with how good he's been at the rim as the low man in the defense and as a helper, or as just like a straight up five in some lineups as well. And so it's a little bizarre that they've been giving up such a high rate of efficiency at the rim. I'm curious if that's going to stabilize, if there's going to be some regression to the mean there. Maybe they've had some bad luck. I mean, bad luck is more tied to three-point shooting than shooting at the rim, obviously. But I wonder if maybe there's sort of an evening out to happen there that will help the Raptors defense, because they don't strike me as a team that should be getting bludgeoned at the rim in terms of efficiency allowed. The fact that they're not allowing teams to get there with like insane regularity, again, middle of the pack in that department, is good. They've been pretty good at suppressing threes and all this stuff, but the percentage of letting up at the rim, most valuable shots in basketball. It's a weird thing. I feel like it's dragged their defense down a little bit. That's something I'm keeping an eye on as we go forward. As far as like individual player takeaways, I feel like obviously the main one's Scottie Barnes, right? Like, the leap feels real, couple blips here and there, but the level he's bringing as a three-point shooter, the sort of leveled up conditioning he seems to have, even with a couple of games where he hasn't quite had the juice throughout the entire 48 minutes. For the most part, he has had that, and that's been a nice, refreshing thing after last year where he kind of floated through a lot of games, didn't appear in a lot of games, despite very much being in there for 77 of the games. You've thrown the three-point shot. That looks real. Like, I feel like I'm just kind of baking in he's a league average shooter at worst at this point, and maybe the bottom's about to fall out and he's going to miss a whole bunch of threes coming up here. But I do feel like the way the jump shot's looking, the stability he has in his base on those catch and shoots in particular, the pull-up stuff is really fun when it happens, not something I'm banking on, but the catch and shoot stuff looks pretty good, and he's putting them up so eagerly that I think league average shooter is kind of there for him. And that, to me, combined with the defensive jump, combined with the small little jumps he's taken as like a pick and roll ball handler, where he's been, by the efficiency, I haven't checked this number exactly in a little bit, but for a stretch there, he was their best pick and roll ball handler Would imagine Dennis Schroeder's maybe ticked up a little bit there as him and Jakob Poeltl have figured out the chemistry a little bit. But overall, the steps Scottie's made as a creator have been really nice. And he's not doing it as like a traditional point guard all the time, right? Like he's doing it from the wings, attacking closeouts. Obviously he's done some stuff as a big man and working from the middle of the floor. The kickouts on those, short rolls have been pretty, darn pretty. Good God, I'm bad at English. Either way, I think all of this tracks and suggests that Scottie Barnes is the real deal. What the timeline for his ascent to like full superstardom looks like, it still remains to be seen. We've seen flashes where it looks like it's happening right now or in the next year or two. And then other times where it's like, maybe it's still a few years down the road. But either way, Scottie Barnes has been awesome. And I think he's obviously like the biggest conclusion to draw from this team on a player level, because him becoming this player changes the context of a lot of the decisions that have to be made. He's also just like made the team a lot more entertaining and fun to watch, which is, I think, a pretty important thing. It's like exciting to tune in every night, even if they don't play amazingly, just to see what Scottie Barnes is up to, because the development track for him has been such a thrill to behold over the course of this year. And so, I'm not terribly surprised by how the offense or defense has performed so far. I think overall 9-10 about makes sense considering the record. Like there's nothing that's terribly shocking about what we've seen, but I do think the Scottie Barnes jump is the clear big takeaway from this start of the season. I'm not like telling tales out of school. I'm not exactly dropping a hot take here, but I do think that informs a lot of what we're going to see over the next 20 games as to, okay, what does this look like around Scottie Barnes now? How are they massaging the fit? What's working? What's not? And obviously, a lot of that is tied up in the Scottie, Pascal, OG trio, the decision of, do you break them up? Do you keep them together and try to rework the pieces around them going forward? That is the decision that comes into focus as we move into the second quarter of the season. And we will dive into that coming up in just 1 second here. Before we do that, however, got to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel, the #1 sports book in all the land. You got to go check them out right now, because as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. It is not just for NFL fans, of course. They got every sport under the sun over there on FanDuel. You want to go throw some money on the Raptors-Knicks game tonight? You can totally go ahead and do that. Do a same-game parlay with, player stats or whatever it might be. It's all there on FanDuel for you to peruse. It's a great time to do it. And right now, you can go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season in style. I guess they're continuing the NFL season. They're nearing the end. But either way, there are kickoffs involved, so the copy makes sense. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL and of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, we continue on here. Your first listen of the day. Sean here. Thanks so much for tuning in, rocking with the show. Much appreciate it. And, we got some good stuff coming up next week. If you haven't yet, go listen to some previous episodes this week. Talked about a couple of games, obviously. Had the 905 deep dive with Vivek Jacob on Tuesday. All there for you to peruse. So go ahead and do that. But let's dive in now to the Scottie, Pascal, and OG of it all, right? All the tail of the tape stuff of the team so far, unsurprising, I think, kind of exactly what we thought this team might look like. At least what I thought they'd look like, especially out of the gate. The stuff with Pascal, Scottie, and OG has been the thing I've been watching all season long. You might have picked up on this through line, this thread throughout the episodes on the show so far this year. I kind of think this is the single most important thing happening around the Raptors right now, is the constant evaluation and massaging of the fit between Scottie Barnes, Pascal Siakam, and OG Anunoby. My inclination, if you were to give the Raptors front office truth serum, based on their behavior so far, where they've kept these guys around through multiple trade cycles and rumors and et cetera, obviously the Pascal lack of extension kind of cuts into this thought a little bit, but I think if you gave them truth serum, they would like to keep all three of those guys on the team. The financial stuff obviously gets difficult, and it becomes the thing that makes you have to question whether or not you move one of these guys. But as far as the fit goes, I think we're starting to really see that there's just a sample, a history of these guys working well with each other if the context around them is right. And yes, that's a big caveat if the context around them is right. But for me, that's like a caveat that you have to figure out. Sure, it takes a lot of work. It's going to take some ingenuity and creativity and some moves. But I'm just the type of person who prioritizes getting really talented basketball players and letting the really talented basketball players figure things out. And to me, I'm having a hard time seeing an avenue where the Raptors assemble 3 players better than Scottie, Pascal, and OG from their current station without doing the whole nuke it and go back to the tank thing, which they're just not going to do. We know this is not what this front office does. And frankly, I know other people disagree. It is my favorite thing about this front office that they do not partake in the tank off. I really like it. Again, you can disagree with that all you want. It's fine. For me, again, we have data that suggests these 3 guys playing with the right types of players around them can be a winning formula. The numbers with just those 3 on the floor, last season, even the team was not very good. They won their minutes. The 3 of them, Pascal, Scottie, OG, together on the floor, won their minutes by 4.1 points per 100 possessions. Not incredible, but certainly in the upper crust of like trios in the NBA, the upper tier. They were even in Scottie's rookie year, plus 1.2. And that, of course, is from a season in which this is different now, right? Like the last couple seasons, Scottie was not this player. This is a different style of player that we're seeing. Obviously, the 3-point shooting that's come into play with him has been a massive, massive change. And we're just seeing that the minutes with those guys on the floor, they're positive. They're winning these minutes. We also have a track record of those 3 guys with Jakob Poeltl and a pull-up shooting point guard being very good. Yes, it was at the back end of last season, but it's 625 possessions worth of basketball that indicates that those 3 plus Jakob Poeltl and a pull-up shooting lead guard can be a winning formula. Plus 9.1 net rating for that lineup last year with Fred VanVleet in there among the starters. It was really bloody good. And that was before Scottie Barnes had this 3-point jump. That seems to change the calculus a little bit too on what you'd need to really kind of make this team sing. I also think that at some point, Jakob Poeltl is not going to be the center of a Scottie Barnes, Pascal Siakam-OG Anunoby led team. He can be a perfectly fine stopgap who is fine, not perfect in this next little stretch. A perfectly fine stopgap who is fine, not perfect. That seems like I am going against what I'm saying there. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh my God. Contradictory. Good God. Feels like a Monday, but it's Friday. Wow. Either way, we've seen these guys work together. Also, this season so far, without Jakob Poeltl on the floor, those 3 guys, Scottie, Pascal, OG, plus 20.2 net rating in 119 possessions. They have similar numbers as well in a much smaller sample of those 3 guys without Dennis Schroeder on the floor as well. Those 3 guys with the right pieces around them are really good. And I think it would be a mistake to just say, well, it's the easiest thing to just trade Pascal for some stuff and then figure it out from there. It probably is the easiest thing. It is like the path of least resistance to say, hey, you know what? We're not going to pay Pascal his next deal. We're going to trade him for what we can at the deadline, 70 cents on the dollar, or whatever. It's just time to do it. And that might be the decision they come to. They're 9-10 right now. They're not a world-beating team by any means. If it stays like this and they're like exactly 500 come deadline time, the on-court metrics of those 3 guys together might not matter to the front office. And it might just be a matter of, okay, we got to pick a direction here. We got to make a stance and make a trade and get what we can for Pascal while we can. I just think there's got to be a better way than that to keep your most talented players together. Talented players who, again, we've seen work with one another. And I think it's gotten even easier to work this year because of the Scottie Pascal dynamic. And yes, I know it's been kind of oscillating in terms of usage and, Pascal will lead the team in shots this game. And then Scottie doesn't lead shots. Like, okay, I get it. Like sometimes you're going to have a disparity in the shots taken and the usage for these guys. But I do think they're finding a balance. I think it makes sense that Pascal is being so heavily leaned upon right now because the dude is a 2-point machine. And he's just been an absolute post-up wizard so far this season. He's been crazy good in transition as a finisher as well. And I think that, yes, that leads to this sort of like, oh, well, whose team? We just get too reductive and too simplistic about this. Teams got to have multiple good players. teams got to have multiple avenues to offense. And I think what we're seeing with Scottie, again, looking kind of like a league average shooter at worst right now, with Scottie having, pick and roll creation, with Scottie being a guy who you can play at the 5 and have him absolutely cook either as a pick and pop guy or as a pick and roll finisher or as a short roll creator. I think the Venn diagram, there's this whole thing of, Scottie and Pascal occupy too many of the same spaces on the floor. I don't think that's actually true anymore. The Venn diagram of where these guys work, the middle ground is like not so, like it's a small little ground that we're talking about here now. You have Scottie doing his wing creation stuff, his 3-point shooting, his pick and roll creation, his small ball stuff. Pascal's workload and sort of areas in which he can affect the game are dwindling. They're smaller. There's less of them. But that's fine. He's going to be a number 2 option on this team in this sort of idealized version of it. It's okay if he has fewer areas where he can go and cook, but the areas where he can cook in transition and as a post-up guy, he's bloody amazing at. And that's a really nice compliment to have in your offense. You have Scottie and Pascal. Their main overlap is they are big dudes who pass real nice. And yeah, sometimes you're going to have Scottie work post-ups here and there. I think he's perfectly fine at it. He draws 2, he kicks out, he can score. I think his touch from the sort of push shot range where he's often going to be shooting as a post-up player, that has left a little bit to be desired. We'll see if that can bounce back. It's the second straight year that's declined in terms of efficiency so far from the 3 to 10 foot range. Maybe Scottie's best pathway is not as a post-up guy. Maybe he's a different guy entirely. Maybe he's someone who works more as a downhill creator. And that frees up to Pascal to kind of carve out the post-up gig all on his own. Again, there will be spots where their skills are overlapped. That's mostly tied to the players they're playing with, though. And I think with the right context around them, whether it's a shooting center or you get Scottie at the 5 with just sort of a little bit more space on the wings and in the guards in the backcourt, like those 2 guys can operate in different places. They do similar things in terms of being really good passers for their big positions and all of that, but they can operate in different spots and still have a lot of success. And then OG just fits with anybody, right? OG is just like, okay, you plop him in, he's going to shoot 40% from 3 and be one of the best defenders alive and be an excellent play finisher for you. That I think is universal no matter who he plays with. And so, yeah, those 3 guys, I think the fit makes sense. For me, obviously, it just comes down to, how viable is it to keep those 3 together while also rounding out the rest of the roster to make more sense around them? And I think that's a fair question. I think that is something that has like a fair amount of obstacle to it for the Raptors to try and clear to keep these 3 guys together. But I think through 20 games, I feel very good about that trio of players together. And the idea of giving yourself like a 4 or 5 year runway by locking them all in, to me, like you rarely get that luxury to kind of build something over many, many years in the NBA. The Raptors have that right now if they want it, whether they extend Pascal before the deadline to get that sorted away. They give OG whatever it's going to take, whether it's a max, whether it's a near max, whatever it is. They can't have a walkaway number on OG if they're going to free agency with him in the summer. It can't be like Fred, where it gets to a point where you get queasy. You just got to be ready to prepare to pay the whole freight. And I think that's fine because OG is, yes, not a super great creation option or anything like that, but he's clearly a dude who wins you minutes when he's on the floor, which is kind of what this whole thing is about. And so for me, it comes down to, can you find ways to make moves on the margins to better this roster over the next few years? It's not going to be an overnight thing. You're not going to entirely reshape this roster in one summer or one deadline or anything like that. But can you set yourself up over the next few years to be able to make these moves to better assemble a roster that makes sense around those 3 guys? I think there's actually more of a pathway to that than is maybe being outlined, where it kind of feels like the sort of general consensus from the fan base, people I sort of muck around with in the fake trade sickos chat in the Discord. The consensus seems to be the only way to do this thing is to get rid of Pascal and figure out the rest from there. And I just don't agree with that. And I'll get into that as I answer a listener question about this very thing coming up on the other side. Before we do that, however, got to tell you about our friends over at Game Time, the single best place for you to go and get tickets for your next sporting event, your next concert, theater event, whatever it might be. It's all there for you on Game Time with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Look, it's a stressful thing. You want to buy tickets to an event and you don't want to have to go peruse a million different sites. You don't got to worry about that because Game Time has the Game Time guarantee. you're going to get the best price at Game Time. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less somewhere else, Game Time is going to credit you with 110% of the difference. It means there's no downside of just going straight to Game Time and getting the best tickets, because they are guaranteeing they are going to have the best prices on those seats. You also get zone deals where you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, rounding out the show here on a Friday. Thanks so much for tuning in and rocking with the show all week. Just a reminder, Locked On Sports 24/7 is our all-day streaming channel on Locked On Sports Today's YouTube channel. 24/7 Locked On shows covering the biggest stories around the sports world, national shows, local shows, and the biggest stories. It's all there for you. Go subscribe. It's a wonderful thing. Okay, let's get into a couple of listener questions tied to the 20-game mark a little bit. There's an in-season tournament one we might get to at the end as well. But this one comes from KJ, tied to the exact thing we were talking about before, drawing the conclusions on the Scottie Pascal OG trio after 20 games. And the question is there a way to get some shooters so we can really see Scottie Pascal OG as a trio and what they might actually be able to do? So many want to trade Pascal when the team isn't set up for him or Scottie to shine. And yeah, kind of what I just dove into, right? I think those three guys, we've proven over many years now, they win minutes. They are a positive trio on the floor that wins basketball games, wins minutes, maybe not as many games as you'd like. But again, team context, pretty important here. And it comes down to the supporting cast. How many nights have we seen, wow, the starters kicked ass, and then the rest of the team kind of let the whole thing down? And yeah, you have to find avenues to assembling the rest of your roster and filling out the back end of your rotation. And I understand the compulsion for some people to say, well, you got to trade Pascal for depth. That's how you do it. You get depth in young players, and that's how you fix this whole thing. I just don't think that is the avenue to maximizing, optimizing the talent on this team and optimizing the supporting cast and the star power you have around one Scottie Barnes, who is the most important thing here. So for me, yeah, my sort of dream vision here is you keep those three together and you spend the next little while, next couple seasons, tinkering on the margins to better amplify what those three guys do together. Those three guys, like, that's future basketball, man. Big ball dudes who are big, who can also handle the ball, be talented, shoot, all that stuff. That is the future of the NBA. And, you know, I think Vision 6-9, I've talked about this a little bit. In theory, it makes a lot of sense. You know, having big players at all the positions, that gives you an advantage in a sport where big players have an advantage. But you have to have the requisite skills to run functional basketball as well. And that's where the limitations of just the sheer number of basketball players alive who have those skills at that size and the ability for you to go and get them on your team being really hard, like, that's where the limitations come into the Vision 6'9" thing. But you can have three dudes who kind of check the boxes of what Vision 6'9" or what big ball is all about, skill ball, large skill ball, whatever it is we're calling it. Like, that is a pretty good starting place to be. For me, I think, people are going to hate me for this, but draft capital, baby. That's your avenue to getting the pieces around Scottie Barnes and Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby, who can really put this team, I think, on a track towards contention. After the pick conveys, most likely this year, to the Spurs, the Raptors will have all of their first-round picks back in the coffers. Am I advocating you go trade all of those picks for somebody? It depends on the guy, I suppose. If there's a superstar who becomes available, sure, go nuts. You have the contracts to go and match in salaries in a lot of cases. You have Jakob Poeltl, you have Dennis Schroeder, you have Chris Boucher. If it happens this season, obviously you still have Gary Trent Jr. Will he be around beyond this year? Not so sure. Talking about 20-game takeaways, Gary Trent Jr., we'll see. But yeah, I think for me, it's probably not going to happen at the deadline this year. And hell, I could see them selling at the deadline this year in a way that does not see them move on from Pascal or OG. It's selling the other pending UFAs to get as many different assets you can have to go into the summer to work on reassembling this roster, whether it's turning Dennis Schroeder into someone who's got a little bit more pop. Maybe you try to find a way to convince the Knicks to trade with you to get Emmanuel Quickley. There's news or rumors around Quickley's future. There are more unproven guys than Emmanuel Quickley. Jaden Ivey, for example. Like, you can make a trade for Jaden Ivey that can be seen as a deal to amplify your main three guys. It doesn't have to bear fruit immediately, but like, that's also not going to take you a boatload of picks to go get it done. Like, that's a smart on the margins, depressed asset type addition that I think could help make the main three guys on this team really sing. Obviously, Grady Dick getting better is going to be a big part of this. You would hope that Grady Dick, by the time the season wraps up, is having a little bit more success. The three's falling. He's getting into NBA games. He's looking more like a future rotation piece. I'm not worried about Grady Dick, but the quicker he can become a rotation piece, the easier this whole thing gets as well. I just think there are more imaginative, creative, fun ways to go and build this team around the core three guys who you already have in the house. You have the hard part figured out. Those three guys can be the three best guys on a good team, baking in Scottie Barnes' growth, which is obviously still in the process of happening. But if Scottie Barnes ascends to being one of the 15 best players alive, all of a sudden you're looking at like, wow, Pascal, OG, Scottie, that's 3 top 50 players, 3 top 40 players, whatever we're going to, decide to draw the lines at, with one of them being Scottie Barnes on this superstar track. That's 100% the type of core that goes and wins a lot of games in the NBA. Like, that is just it. And so if you can turn the picks you're going to have available to you once again this summer, get a developmental story or two from a Grady Dick. Hopefully Christian Coloco can come back at some point. It's really concerning that we've yet to hear anything about him, and a big bummer. That's a dude who I thought had a lot of promise, and him, if he's just a non thing anymore, that is a problem. That stinks. That's a big setback. But I think I don't think it's quite as dire as the picture is being painted as. And I frankly think this version of the team, if Dennis Schroeder were, ex pull-up shooting point guard, I think the team's in a pretty good spot, right? Especially if Dennis Schroeder is maybe your bench point guard, that even gets even better. I don't think they're that far. You're 9-10. You're in a league where there's a lot of middle ground. You're part of the middle ground right now. You're probably at the bottom part of the middle ground, to be sure. But the jump from middle ground, bottom middle ground to top middle ground and sort of into the next crust of contender types, it's not like a hilariously impossible gap to jump, right? You're not Evel Knievel trying to jump the Grand Canyon here. There is an avenue that doesn't involve trading away who is still your best player in Pascal Siakam. Maybe Scottie's their best player this season. That's probably true, I guess. But they're both really good is the point. Keeping those three main guys together in the interest of ensuring that the top end talent remains on your roster, while taking some time using the picks you're going to have available to tinker on the margins or draft players down the line who can fit into the mix a little bit better. Whatever it is, if you can set up a runway of 4 or 5 years with Scottie, Pascal, OG, I think you just got to do it and figure it out. That's the talent play. And to me, that's kind of where I've come around. I've answered this question from KJ for a very long time. But yeah, I think there is a way to get some shooters so we can really see what Scottie, Pascal, OG as a trio looks like, to answer your question in one line, like I maybe we should have done off the top. Let's get to one last question here from that Marfin, which is a good one, also from the Discord. Again, if you want questions answered on the show, the Discord's the place to drop them. So join the Discord. Do it. But the question is, if the Raptors did make the in-season tournament, what would be an optimal rotation? What would an optimal rotation look like? What was the best 8 to 9 man rotation a quarter of the way into the season in a must-win game? I like this question a lot because it fuses the 20-game threshold with the in-season tournament, which I love very much. I wish the Raptors were still playing in. But yeah, had they made the knockout rounds, were there must-win games to be played by the Raptors right now? Obviously, I think the rotation is looking Scottie, Pascal, OG, Dennis, Yak to start. I think you probably close, depending on the matchup, with Gary Trent Jr. in there in place of Jakob Poeltl, or maybe Otto Porter Jr. once in a while here and there. We saw them close with that lineup a couple times, and it was nice. And they haven't quite gone back to it. Come back, Otto. We love you. But either way, those are your 5 guys. Gary Trent Jr. is your 6th guy. Precious Achiuwa seems to have carved out the role as the 7th guy. Maybe you have your mileage varies on if you think that's good or not. I think Precious obviously has his faults. He drives me crazy, but I also can't quit him. I think he's a perfectly reasonable 7th man on this team. And then from there, Otto Porter Jr. I think has to be in there. If you're trying to win a must-win game, Otto Porter Jr. feels like the guy to be your number 8. Really good defender, shoots threes. Obviously he hasn't done a ton in terms of affecting stuff on the floor this year when he's played. But I still think, in a must-win situation, having a guy who started finals games 18 months ago, you could do a lot worse than that. And then from there, the 9th guy, what is it? Malachi Flynn? Is it Chris Boucher? I think it's Malachi Flynn, frankly. I think Flynn's been fine. Like, probably one of the biggest surprises and like nice stories from the start of the season, even though he's been mostly just fine and nothing more than that. I think what he's done has been pretty impressive considering the expectations I had for him coming into the season. So he's probably your 9th man. And then maybe you trim down to an 8-man rotation and chop Flynn out of there and just lean on Scottie creation and Pascal creation and Dennis obviously playing heavy minutes. That would probably be the rotation for a must-win game right now. It's a shame we don't get to see one. I would like that very, very much, but we can all root for a Kings-Pacers final in Vegas in the Sabonis Halliburton Bowl in the NBA Cup. That would be pretty sweet. I guess that would be a nice consolation to the Raptors getting skunked in their attempt in the IST. We will leave that there. That feels like a good place to end out the week. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Thanks to those who sent in questions for the pod. And thanks to all of you for tuning in, supporting, rocking with the show. We'll be back again next week. Obviously, we'll talk about the game tonight against the New York Knicks, tee up the rest of the games, talk about the games as they happen. Jamar Hines will be along, Katie Heindel, Vivek Jacob. I think we're going to get Oren Weisfeld on sometime next week as well. So we got lots of good, fun goodies for you waiting. But in the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you again on Monday, another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.